All right, folks, welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. We have episode number 93 today. The Law of One and the raw material with our guest Brian Scott. Brian Scott runs a YouTube channel as well called Reality Revolution. He has a podcast. Good stuff if you like meditation and dimensional metaphysics type stuff. Check his page out. You can check us out on Patreon at patreon.com/Mike and Maurice. As you can see, we get all the links there. The links are also below. For $2 a month, you get access to some exclusive content. But without further ado, what's going on, Brian? How are you? Good to have you back on.
I'm doing great. So excited to be here. It's good to be back.
Glad to have you.
Absolutely. So we were texting back and forth a little bit, and I check out your channel when I have time, because I meditate a lot, so I like some of the frequency stuff you do, like 528 hertz and that kind of stuff with the guided meditation. You do some good stuff, but you also talk about other subjects too, channeled stuff, metaphysical stuff. And one of the things you brought up was this thing I had never heard of, which was called the Law of One. The raw material, which is a channeled piece from the early 80s that involves this entity claiming to be Ra, who is the god of, known from ancient Egypt.
Right.
And he's basically answering questions to these people that are asking him all sorts of questions about ancient history and, the universe, that kind of stuff. So what's your take on it? And why don't you talk a little bit about the origin of it?
Sure. I'm definitely interested in channeled works, and there's always that question: is how legit is any channeled work? How much is it coming from the channeler? So sometimes you take it with a grain of salt, but the entirety of the material in the Law of One resonates. If you read it, it's doctoral level metaphysics. When the language used can be a little difficult for people to understand, but the information is powerful and thought-provoking and very interesting to talk about. It covers everything from our place in the universe and the way that we move through different levels of consciousness and reincarnation and the history of the solar system and all kinds of interesting things. So it is incredibly thought-provoking and exciting if even 50% of it has some level of truth. So it's fun to talk about for sure.
Now, it's also, just to point out, it's not, Ra isn't considered just one person based on these.
Right. So the concept in the Law of One, so it's the way that they channeled is not like when you look at like Esther Hicks channeling on stage where she's or somebody or Bashar. It's three people. These people had been researching channeling. This is happening a lot starting during when LSD is starting to come out, and they're experimenting with different psychedelics, and they put together an idea that they'll have one hypnotist that pulls them into deep trance that is asking the questions, and then one person that's doing the channeling, and another person that's a scribe, and the three people together seem to create a more legitimate type of channeling experience. The Law of One is Jim McCarty, Don Elkins, and Carla Ruckert. Carla Ruckert is the one that's doing the channeling. She's written a book about channeling, and you can even read some of her writings and see the difference in the language used in the Law of One. So you can, a lot of times, like with old writings, people can go back and look at Shakespeare and see, oh, Shakespeare wrote that because of his syntax and writing. So it's interesting to look at when a normal channeler is talking and you can compare their syntax and is this the channeler? And so the person asking the questions, super deep, very, very good, detailed questions. And so the channel starts, and the interesting thing they realize that they can only ask questions of this channel. This channel will not just suddenly just start giving information, almost as if it's limited as to how much it can reveal. It will only reveal as long as it doesn't violate the free will of the people involved or people that may listen to it. And the information, they can only get questions answered. Ra's never going to volunteer any information. So over the course of about 3 years, you can go to lawofone.info and watch and listen to the recordings and the way that the channel is occurring, and you can judge for yourself. But there's some incredible questions about physics, about reincarnation, and there's some really interesting answers that come out of it that are super interesting and thought-provoking. One of the first concepts that's discussed is the idea that there are 7 levels of consciousness, densities of consciousness that we go through, starting at the basic level, fire, wind, just a bacteria, and then moving up to second density where we're animals and plants that have some feelings and survival instincts, and then we move up to third density where we have awareness and consciousness like we do now. But there are, according to Ra, additional levels of consciousness that we're moving through. We have a 4th level of consciousness, which is similar to love, a 5th level of consciousness, which is an understanding, a 6th level, which is like an ascension almost to another level that's harder to explain, and a 7th level, which is the beginning of another level. And so he's explaining that planets, that beings all go through these levels of consciousness as a way that the assertion by Ra, who, interestingly enough, Ra claims to at one time had visited the Earth in the past to bring this information. Ra is a social memory complex, which is what you're talking about. The idea is that as we move to higher levels of consciousness, there are social memory complexes that occur. So when you hear people channeling entities, they say we or our. It's because there's a point in time where our consciousness melds with other consciousness. And in the universe, there are social memory complexes that form naturally as a part of the natural evolution. There is groups of consciousness. And so Ra is, according to Ra, the social memory complex of the planet Venus from millions of years ago, existing outside of time, and in a humble messenger of this law, explaining the dynamics of it and how it works. So when you're reading this, your jaw opens and how do I take this? It's pretty interesting stuff, right? So
Yeah.
I can keep on going.
Well, no, so I just wanted to point out too, just so people have a background on the actual Ra from ancient Egypt. He was known as, basically the sun god, or, and then later on he was fused with Horus. That's why you see the Eye of Horus and the Eye of Ra are pretty much the same thing. And then later on in later dynasties, they even changed it again to Amun Ra. So he's obviously the Ra character was considered, the sun god. So I guess my question would be, where this group identity, what did you call it? Group identity complex, or
social memory complex?
Social memory complex. What does that have to do with the sun? Number one, and number two.
Okay.
If that's the case, if this, let's say the Ra actually came down in ancient Egypt, then why is it portrayed as like the one god, or the creator god, as opposed to, let's say, like you're saying, like a
It's super fascinating when you get to the idea of the sun. So he's historically he may have been considered a sun god, but in some ways, when Ra explains it, he's definitely there's great, magnificent respect for the sun. When you look at the universe as they ask questions, there's this energy, this idea of intelligent infinity. And so when they ask, they ask that each of the different units are called logos. So the galaxy is a living...
logos is in like the ancient Greek term logos?
It is referred to that. It's also in the Bible. There are some interpretations that say in the beginning was the logos. But the concept of logos described in the Law of One is that each separate entity that is independently a part of intelligent infinity, we are a sub-logos. We are aware as a sub-logos, right? The planet, according to Ra, is a sub-logos that is an independent, aware consciousness. And the sun is the main logos of our solar system, according to Ra, using its power of light to create densities, and has created the entire solar system and created all of the planets. And so they had, the sun is, in many terms, a god to them in their understanding of the way that the universe works, and that there are levels of logos. There's groups of star systems. There's the galaxy, which is its own. logos. So the concept, there's this idea as we move up in consciousness, there may be levels where there is an independent entity that is the sun. When you look up at the sun, it is a thinking, creating being that created the planets and had a plan and everything, created the planets according to Ra for reasons. That they have symbology and everything, but at the same time, the sun has its own free will. Each of the planets have their own free will. We have our own free will as a part of the system. So the Earth created living creatures with opposable thumbs. In Venus, I guess Venus was different. They were able to move up the levels of consciousness. They didn't have opposable thumbs. There's this, the archetype of Venus is love, right? So that may be some shades of old archetypes of that planet. According to, there's other interesting material. I don't want to get too crazy with some of it, but is that an explanation? Does that make sense? Why maybe people have interpreted him as the sun god? It was his interpretation of what the sun was in relation to the universe.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So you brought up a good point, which is that what we know about evolution, what we know about consciousness is 100% based on our view of our life on Earth.
Science.
The science that we've created, which science is basically just observations of repeatable
over a very short period of time, we've been able to observe.
It's just
with
repeatable patterns,
right?
basically, is all science is, or observable patterns. Now, if you look at the entire universe of what we know, there's so much out there. It's so vast. We're discovering stuff new every day. Even within our own solar system, we by no means know everything.
Yeah.
And we've had a lot of people on our podcast, that talk about how the universe, and scientists too, that the universe may be conscious. That's a lot. I've seen that a lot now in scientific articles. That's a big one recently. The thing is, for me, when I think about this stuff, the channeling thing, it's kind of, I'm not against it. I'm very skeptical of it, but not skeptical as that I don't believe it's possible. It's more of, I just think that, like you said, how much of it is coming from that person? Like, how much is that person projecting from their own subconscious?
It's a real question.
Yeah,
it's a real question.
Yeah, but if we were all connected in the first place, maybe it's already within us. That's what I was thinking. So,
we might be channeling something from within us, but there's definitely a serious question that we have to ask with every channeled work. Is its legitimacy? And we can only really judge each of us ourselves on that. That's really all that we can do. If we're stuck with science, then we're only going to use the evidence we have for science. I think that we're still limited. If there's information like this, where else would we get it? If an alien intelligence sent us a signal, would it be by satellite, or would it be through consciousness? And so there is hey, we can explore this information. So what I try to do is, I'm not going to ignore it. I'm somebody that's just an information junkie. So I'm going to read this information and I'm going to judge for myself. There's always going to be a part of me that says, maybe not. There's always going to be a part of me that does that, because that's important for me with everything. But there's also that part of me that I can separate and say, maybe. And how does this corroborate with everything else that I already know? Right.
Well, it's all cross-referencing. It's all connecting the dots. The only thing I tend to check myself, with the confirmation bias, cognitive bias, that kind of stuff, because it's easy. Our brains are wired towards pareidolia. We're looking for patterns. That's what we do.
We're looking, exactly.
So you do have to check yourself sometimes. And there's been things that, like when we started this podcast, there's so many more things that I thought were true, or there was truth in them, or they were accurate, or they were real mysteries, or whatever, that I know for a fact are not. They're bunk, they're fake, they're whatever, they've been debunked. And I like to tread, and I texted you this too, there is a real fringe out there. There is this real window
absolutely, no doubt,
of mystery. However, it's the more I learn, it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. I'm not saying it's going to disappear at some point, but I think when you're on the path of truth or enlightenment or whatever you want to call it, you tend to find things. It's a more of a narrow window, and once you get to the point where I feel like you've maybe been doing it for a long time, you have a better grasp on when you hear something or you read something or whatever, you can cross-reference it against everything else you've learned and know, okay, this is bunk or this is good or there's something good in this.
Right.
But no, you make some good points, and I don't think I encourage everybody to look at everything that's possible, and even science is looking at metaphysical stuff like psychic abilities, and obviously there's been even our government with the SRI remote viewing program and stuff like that.
Right.
You have even scientists like Rupert Sheldrake who does experiments with animals predicting when their owners are going to be coming home, and also the one where if you can tell if somebody's looking at you, when your head's turned.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And they've found that I think it's like 54%, which is 4% more than half, which is something. You know what I'm saying? So there are,
it's pretty crazy.
Even Dean Radin, his book Real Magic is a great book that talks about psi and all that kind of stuff too.
Dean Radin is amazing.
Yeah.
He's a huge, I totally respect his science too.
Yeah, well,
one
he's
of the
a real
things
scientist
about
for sure.
These channelers, Jim, these channelers, the impressive thing is they were questioning it too. There's notes and comments they're making. And also, when you read the book, they're questioning some of this stuff too. They're taking the information. They purposely never told the channel any of the information for almost like 6 months so that they could make sure that the information they were receiving from the channel was legitimate. So that's one reason that I found it interesting, is that they had the same questioning idea of the material they were receiving in that moment. They weren't saying, "Oh, this is the truth." They were questioning it as well. So there was.
I had a quick question for you.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mazer.
No, go ahead.
I was just curious. Do they how do they decide which questions they're going to ask?
This is done over about a 3.5 year period of time. So it seems kind of like it built on itself. Like they would have the channel could only talk for a certain period of time, and then they would stop. The channel would say, "We cannot. The life energy of the channel is too low. We must continue at another time." So they would kind of develop their questions over time. They would ask some beginning ones, and it seemed like there's some seeds, but they only could ask a certain way. There are times when Ross said, "Sorry, we can't answer that," or they will never volunteer any information. So they had to be kind of tricky with their questions to get information. But some of the information is pretty mind-blowing. They do ask about previous incidents, about UFOs and where these encounters occurred and what they mean and why we have UFO encounters. And Rod knows it's irrelevant. They even said, "We're asking you this information because it's possible this material might be read on a wider scale because people will be interested in this. We understand it's not important. Would you still answer it?" And Ross said, "Okay." So Rod would answer some of these questions about certain UFO contacts, which was also interesting. But
what happened?
Yeah, what's that?
What'd they say?
Oh, there's a whole bunch of different. They go back over major UFO contacts and ask what was happening in those UFO contacts. There's one of the things about this that is interesting. They describe several things. Number one, that it explains the Fermi Paradox, right? We have this question, why aren't we seeing these on a regular basis? It's a real question. We see so much of the universe and galaxies, at least on some level, you would think that we would see robots, right? There's been billions of years. You'd think there would be advanced artificial intelligence or robots that we would have access to.
Well,
or
yeah, some sort of like von Neumann probe, which is what they think.
And this,
go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. There's got to be some von Neumann probe with my understanding of just basic tech and advancements in technology. But we are purposely, the Earth is purposely being limited in information just so our free will and our natural evolution is not unhinged.
Okay.
Is it the explanation that the Law of One gives? And so they explain that there are several ways to travel beyond the speed of light that are described. There are some races, according to the Law of One. I'm not saying this is true, but I'm relaying that use and they explain as advanced understandings of hypothermia, so that they can travel for long distances less than speed of light. They indicate that that's from Sirius. They indicate that there's some races that reach a certain level in their understanding of consciousness where they can do a slingshot using light that travel in instantaneous ways. The questioner who's also got a degree in physics is asking about how this works. And then there are certain levels once you reach the sixth density of consciousness according to Ra, you can travel instantaneously through thought. Instantaneously anywhere in the universe, and that a lot of these advanced alien races do that, and they're very easily for them to retain invisibility, and they may have certain differing interests in our planet, but they can't violate the free will. There's some kind of overlying, if you violate free will, then they can't do it. There's certain places on the Earth where you can randomly kind of get into the Earth's force field. It's not perfect. The system is not perfect that blocks the Earth from the rest of the universe, according to Ra. But when I'm reading this, I'm going, oh, that's so interesting. It's right. Part of
sounds
me is
like
going,
a sci-fi novel.
It does. It sounds like me, an old science fiction fan that loves science fiction, was probably going to be drawn to this anyway, because I love that. I love, anything science fiction. So part of me is reading it like I'm reading an advanced version of the Jedi and Sith. There's definitely negative influences and positive influences, and there's disinformation and weird stuff. The UFO stuff is not important. If you're a spiritual seeker that comes to the Law of One, you can find stuff in that material that, even if it's not completely true, that will spiritually speak to you and help you on spiritual levels with meditation and things like that. That are they're talking about universal things that have power, but beyond that, I mean, they go back over our history and all kinds of interesting things. It's pretty good.
Why do you think a lot of channeled material, whether it be the Law of One or even the Urantia Papers, that kind of stuff, why do you think it's associated with like extraterrestrial, not even necessarily like what we think is a prototype alien or gray alien, but just something metaphysical that's a being that, some would consider an angel, some would consider an alien, some would, there's all these different takes on kind of this same thing, which would be these, extraterrestrial beings.
My impression, my feeling is, when we talk about the universe, the thing that's missing with a lot of science and physics and astronomy is consciousness. That the universe is consciousness, and that there's different levels of consciousness going on all the time. So these channeling efforts are a part of that. And in many ways, we've limited the discussion of consciousness when we talk about alien intelligence, because we're talking about science. We want proof and we want those things. But the channeled works, it's one of the only and best ways to get information to us. And so there might be people that have their own plans or things that they're doing that they're not legitimately channeling, and it's easier to claim that you're channeling an entity without proof. But to me, that it feels like that we are a part of some global thing that's going on, some universal thing that's going on, that's dealing with consciousness, and it's definitely related to channeling. I mean, maybe in the universe, channeling is just a form of communication, no different than me calling you on the phone. But with us, it's this weird thing that we don't understand. It's hard to, so I don't know. It's a good question. It really is. Why aren't we just getting, why aren't channels just from an alien that just wants to hang out with us and give us information about music or something that's not metaphysically related? That's a question that I want to know.
It's kind of a weird dichotomy too, because in one sense we exist, so we therefore know it's possible for something like us to exist, whether it be on another planet, in another galaxy, somewhere else in the universe. They could have different physical properties. Maybe they're non-physical, and like you said, just some sort of consciousness that's formed in some other way that we're just not aware of. You got to start thinking outside the box when you think about that. But on the other hand, I'm sure you think about this too, and I think about it a lot as well, is that we could be this crazy anomaly that happened, like we could be.
Exactly.
And I'm not saying I necessarily even believe that, but I think to not think about that, if you're thinking about the other things, is doing like I said, it's like confirmation bias. You're doing yourself a disservice because you're not really looking at it objectively. So, what are we? Why are we here? Like we are living, breathing magic. So, I have a hard time when I listen to scientists just talk about, observable facts. Because if you look at the history of science, whether it be, and Thomas Kuhn talks about this in the Philosophy of Science, that, at some point enough evidence will bottle up, creating a paradigm shift, which will cause a scientific revolution. We've seen it with, Galileo and Newton and, Einstein all throughout the times. My thing on that is, when you look at those guys, they were all outside the box thinkers. No scientific progress has been made via crawling observations, meaning that when we look at science today, we're making breakthroughs to make, human life better on this planet or whatever. But in terms of big picture stuff, you really don't see that many people thinking outside the box, pushing that fringe line or pushing the envelope.
Right.
I think that you have to do that in some regard. And I'm not even saying like get crazy with it, but just keep pushing the boundary a little bit. When most of the scientific field now is just taking data that's already in place and looking for variations of that, or looking, to deviate a little bit. But we need that crazy outside the box thinking. That's just my opinion on that.
Yeah, someone needs to take a big swing here. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of science today is just corporate science that has specific interest involved based on corporate interests. A lot of independent science is not getting as much funding, and the ones that do, we don't hear a lot about, or it's confusing, or the scientists involved are afraid. There's a deep fear of being chastised or undermined. They consider their own personal interests as more important. I mean, even talking about the law of one, my channel is about the law of attraction, and a little bit, part of me was like, maybe I shouldn't put this out. It's a little bit crazy. I know you've had similar considerations. Some of the stuff, there's certainly some of the stuff, once you start to talking about it, you worry that you undermine your own credibility. And we should be able to talk about this stuff, even if it's not true. We need to break the boundaries and try to think outside of the box. Exactly as you said. I think that's what we're missing right now in this discussion. I don't claim to be an expert. I just claim to be somebody that's gathering this information. Why aren't we talking about this more? And that's what's so great about your channel, is that you're open to these ideas, but you're questioning the validity at the same time. You have a very healthy questioning of this material, which is good. A healthy reticence just to accept it fully, which is why I respect you guys so much. So it's something that we need to talk about,
Well, I mean, like I said, I think that there are things that we can't explain. Somebody commented, definitely woo-woo. Yeah, I mean...
woo-woo! Right.
But again, Newton was woo-woo. When the Greeks were talking... When the Greeks were talking about daemons and demons and spirits and, all these things are connected to something. My personal take on that is a lot of this stuff is connected to psychedelics. Psychedelics have played a huge role in how we've gotten to where we are today.
Right. So Ra talks about psychedelics. Okay. And that's the interesting. So Ra is saying we have intelligent energy that, the sun is a creator of intelligent energy. If you look at the physics of light, we are made up of light that's a certain vibrational level that becomes density, and certain different kinds of light. So we have different energy centers in our body that communicate with this intelligent energy. And many times in our spiritual progress, they're blocked, but these psychedelics can open up access to some of these energy centers and access to intelligent infinity. And so a lot of times what people are seeing when they see fractals or creatures or entities when they do different psychedelics is they're gaining access to an intelligent infinity that's always there all the time, and it's a part of our spiritual progress, and psychedelics are speeding up that process that we're going through. Sometimes it can be unhealthy, as Ross says, and points, but it is one of the things that is we're opening ourselves up to intelligent infinity before we, in many cases, are supposed to. And I think that's one of the things that's done, that psychedelics has done, is opened us up to the possibility of the outside of the box universe that many of us limit ourselves when we consider things to be woo-woo,
Yeah, again, I mean, and what is woo-woo? Yeah, I think there are crazy people out there, whether it be in the UFO community, whether it be in the, ancient civilization community, whether it be, science in general. I think to not question certain parts of science, you have to be kind of a fucking idiot. Excuse my language, but you know, like if you're not questioning some aspects of science, then you're just going to go with the dogma of the day. You really aren't going to learn anything. You know, like I think for, like I said, personal truth and path of enlightenment, you come across things you can't explain. I've had things in my life that have pushed me in the direction of doing this podcast that before that I was very dogmatic, just day-to-day consciousness, not really caring about anything mysteries or metaphysical. I mean, I've always been curious about things, but never, you know, with it, as much as I have within the last 3 years. And things that have brought that on are some synchronicities that are just undeniable. When people say, you know, they want to say, "Oh, it's a coincidence." Go fuck yourself, because I know what I saw and what I've experienced. And if you're going to tell me that was a coincidence, then it must be the most astronomical coincidences that have ever taken place. You know, and I'm not talking about like little things either. I'm talking about big life-changing things. And there's some people that like to turn away from that too when something like that happens. You know, I think even Skeptic, who's one of the top skeptics, Michael Shermer, has a story about him on his wedding day with his wife where she had gotten a radio that was like some old-timey radio from her dad or something like that, and he had been working on it. He couldn't get it to work, and then on their wedding day they were sitting in the room, and some like song that was like memorable to her came on that radio, and they had no explanation for it. Like I said, he's a hardcore skeptic. To this day, he doesn't know, you know, how that, you know, he talks about that too, you know, but
I love those stories like that, man. I could listen all day.
He equates it to,
I know a story like that where the radio started playing a song and it wasn't plugged in, similar to what you're talking about. Like a song came up, it was a father's former radio. It's similar coincidence to what you're talking about. And how could they? I mean, the radio wasn't plugged in, and it's playing music. You know, there's going to be proof in the future of the woo-woo that we have now scientifically. That's my belief, that we are dealing with stuff that has basis in science. There's a basis in science of all this stuff. It's just beyond our ability to comprehend. Well, we're not asking the right questions.
Right. And I also think, though, to your point, that we definitely take things too far sometimes, too. Like what you're saying, you're into science fiction, that probably has an impact.
It's going to definitely be a part of my bias.
Just like how for me, I'm super into ancient civilizations, ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, that kind of stuff. So my preconceptions of those, the mysteries, like the Eleusinian mysteries and the Egyptian mystery schools, like that kind of stuff, definitely influences the way that I think about those civilizations. Now, I hardcore reject the ancient alien stuff, not just because there's really no proof for it, but because I understand that people did that. You know what I'm saying? Like most people look at the pyramids, it's still a question to this day. How was it exactly made? But there are a few different theories that make sense. You know what I'm saying? There's the external ramp theory. There's the internal ramp theory. We know that they were able to do stuff like that, because it's like, if you're going to talk about the pyramids, well, what about all the temples? If you're going to talk about all the temples, what about all the intricate machining marks on some of the stuff like that? So and it's not so advanced. Like you have to think about this too, and I want your take on this because I know that the Law of One talks about this, but we know that let's say you are an extraterrestrial, or let's say you are from a different world or galaxy or whatever. You're going to come down and you're going to build things that aren't even precise out of blocks. Like the pyramid's pretty precise in terms of its alignment, north, south, east, and west. And in terms of, the alignments and all that stuff. But when it comes down to like each blocks, the way it was specifically cut, and we know a long time ago it was had a different coating on the outside along with a capstone. So we know that there's some things, anomalous things. However, we know that they had tools to do that kind of stuff. Even like the obelisks, we know that they pounded them out of the ground with is it dolomite or diorite? I forget, but they pounded them out of the ground, and we know that because there's still an obelisk in the ground with pounded out tool marks on them. Right. So that's my take on that whole thing. That's why I don't believe in the ancient alien. I'm not saying that ancient aliens have never visited here ever. I think anything like that's a possibility, but to say they came down and built things here, I think that's a whole...
So what Ra is claiming, and you might be right, so what Ra is claiming when they asked him about that is that we were at a point when Egypt was at a point that the leader of Egypt at the time, I don't remember which one he mentions it, and was open to the law of one. And the earth, once we reach a certain point, we can move to a new density. They had asked the people that
what's density, by the way? You keep talking about density. Explain this density.
We're moving through the levels of consciousness. And so we're in a third density, according to Ra, we're in a third density.
So does that mean dimension? Is it associated with dimensions?
It's related to dimension. Yes. And so when planets go into, they move into a fourth density, and it's part of the evolution of planets throughout the universe, according to Ra. And so Ra thought they could help because they were in advance, because they were sixth density. They came here in the form of a thought and built the pyramids because all matter is living. And they had come to the point where they could manipulate matter and move the pyramids. And they explain how they did it. And at the time that it was built, the alignment of the pyramids was designed to help people come into contact with intelligent infinity. And it was a spiritual thing. It helped increase energy. But it didn't work because the elite at the time pushed out and it just ended up being a detriment. And Ra realized they had made a mistake at the time. It was naive. Ra says they were naive in thinking that this could work. There is a technology behind pyramids that doesn't exist anymore. At the time, it was some a focal point to increase energies and allow people to move on. There's some teachings of that. So when you read it, you'll have to judge for yourself.
I mean, I listened to it on YouTube a little bit, so I did listen to it.
Right.
The thing is with that is, so you're saying that these invisible spirits built the pyramid? Like, wouldn't somebody have seen this?
They were not invisible.
Okay.
At the time, they
became his thoughts.
They came this time when they did it. They became a physical entity that came They can travel instantaneously once they reach that certain level of consciousness, and they came here and became physical. People saw them. They even asked, could people see you? Yes. And people saw them. Damn. They showed up. Because of the level of technology, it was acceptable. People were more accepting that there were gods and those kind of...
But again, how many of them were there, and wouldn't somebody have noticed?
They didn't really explain it. Yeah. They didn't really go into they didn't ask.
Right.
They didn't ask. There's questions they probably could have answered. Or I missed it when it's so dense. There's so much material but that was their explanation. And they even say it's a time that's passed. The pyramids aren't important anymore. There was a capstone. They described that. They gave you descriptions of why they did that. It had, and a group affiliated with Ra also went to South America and did pyramids as well at the same time. It was a time that our Earth had potential to move to another density. That was their explanation of it. I do believe, I've read about the pyramids, that even though, yes, it can be done, the complication of it is very difficult for me to get my head around. It's hard for me to believe that it was just done by humans for the heck of it. They did it, and they used ramps and all of these things. There is something supernatural about the pyramids just because of the time it was built. But I might be wrong,
right.
That's my feeling about it. I agree with you, and I agree with your. There's something going on with the pyramids.
You have to look at but the pyramids. You have to look at not just the Great Pyramids. You have to look at all the Egyptian pyramids, and there is
Why were so many pyramids being built at the time? What was the reason?
But you have to look at the construction, and the construction of the Great Pyramids is the greatest accomplishment of ancient Egypt.
Right.
However, there's the pyramids at Dozer, there's the pyramids. There's different pyramids that are like lead up to the Great Pyramid that were being built. The Red Pyramid, right. The Black Pyramid, the different.
They asked him, why wasn't it perfect? Why did you have blocks? It doesn't make sense. What? They said they didn't want to make it perfect. It would have been too much for people to handle. They purposely made it so that it was a process and how they built it is as best I can explain their description of it.
Right. I guess for me though, when I think about it, like I said, I've studied a lot of like the academic side of ancient Egypt too. So it's not, I believe in a lot of the stuff that like Graham Hancock and, Robert Bivol, some of those guys do. And then you look at some of the other stuff from the mainstream guys like Bob Breer and, those guys. The thing is with, like I said, you have to look at we know evolution is real, right? So if we know evolution is real, there's going to be evolution of thought and ideas and in different things. And as much as the pyramids are a great accomplishment, there is precedent for the lead up to that. The difference between the Great Pyramids and some of the other pyramids is the architect of the Great Pyramids was far superior in knowledge. And I'm not saying that...
where did he get that knowledge?
Well, I mean, the Egyptians were they were master masons. And here's the thing, we do know ancient Egyptians were using psychedelics too. Like there's some speculation that acacia is prevalent in the area, acacia trees, acacia bushes, and we know that Syrian rue, which is an MAOI inhibitor, is found throughout that area. So there could have been some sort of Middle Eastern ayahuasca stuff happening. There's even the blue lotus, which is depicted in ancient hieroglyphs and carvings and stuff like that, which the blue lotus is a hypnotic psychedelic. Its active ingredients, I think, is like aporphine and proaporphine and a couple other different things that cause like a...
So at the time, we were spiritually moving to some kind of different spiritual level through these psychedelics that might have been a catalyst at the time. Correct?
I agree with you. I just think, though, and look, you can look at the Egyptians, and they were
they're incredible,
They were spiritually, above, in terms of, they were the top of the chain when it comes to that, because they were fascinated with death and rebirth, and with the scarab representing that, and in the mummification process and all that stuff. We've talked about this too. Maybe they were creating this place, so if a pharaoh dies and there's a certain alignment with that, he brings certain things with him. The thought is that maybe they were creating this culture, so these entities, which they thought the consciousness would move past death, would then reunite with other family members and other consciousness in the same place for whatever that place may be. But
there's definitely reincarnation as a part of that mythology. There's no doubt.
Well, yeah, the story of Osiris and all that stuff. I'm not opposed to this idea. I just think that, when you talk about the pyramids, it's one of those things where I agree with you. It is an anomaly, and we don't know who built them. But at the same time, there's things to suggest that we know that. I mean, one of the main theories is that they're pretty sure slaves didn't build them, because you would need, a mass amount of people, and then to force them to do it against their will. It doesn't show up within the work of the Great Pyramid, meaning that the skill level is that high. So the theory is that all the farmers that were skilled masons and trade workers who had farms during the wet season when the Nile would flood, they would then go and work on the Great Pyramid because they couldn't do their normal tasks, and then they would be paid and taken care for that way. And you would probably need less of them, assuming that they had some sort of, not pulleys, but some sort of way to move these things around. We know there's the Mer papyrus that talks about, maybe it's something else, but it talks about floating some of the blocks down on boats down the Nile and stuff like that. So and there's granite. We know that Aswan's not that close to the Giza complex in that regard. So how did they get all that heavy red granite to Aswan? So I don't know, man. Like I said, I'm just pointing out
mysteries.
Good points.
The counterpoints.
What I do feel, maybe you can agree with me, that we know very little about our past. There's a lot more that humanity has gone through than it feels like we've gone through, a forgetting that we may have been technologically at another level multiple times, just like Graham Hancock talks about. We might have had, a flood or an ice age. We may have reached levels of technology that we're at now in the past. Mm-hmm. And we don't know. There's no record. Very few humans survived. Who knows what's going on with the pyramids and a lot of other stuff? It's very fascinating, and it feels like there's a lot we don't know. That's what interests me. I feel like I'm just an ignorant living entity, that there's a lot more about our solar system and our planet and our previous civilizations. I desperately want to know. If there's some way I can know, I want to know. So it's fun to talk about. So no doubt.
Should we dabble in the Urantias, or?
We can talk about Urantia.
So, but just to touch back on the Law of One before we transition over. Now, right. Aside from all the pyramid stuff, what do you think is the biggest truth that you've pulled from that in terms of? Because here's my take on the channeling stuff: is that you can take things from things that are fake, whether they be made up or somebody's
and get good stuff out of it.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Like, it doesn't matter if it's real in terms of, did it come from this mystical source and is it accurate, as much as does it help you? Does it give you a good perspective? Does it change your consciousness in a positive way? So that's my take on it. But what do you think is the biggest truth or positive that you've taken from it?
If I was to take out all of the conjecture and the information that's not important, and I was just to look at the important stuff, I would say that an understanding of our consciousness, it's like a science of reincarnation, an understanding of how our consciousness, even in our lifetimes, we're moving through certain levels of understanding in our place in the universe, which is very spiritually powerful, and that we are there is right now, as we live in this life, there's a polarity that we're battling with. That's natural, that we see, of good and evil, that we're dealing with, that's a part of our spiritual path, and it's a part of what we're going through now, and that we're moving towards a unity of thought and mind it's interesting to conceive of on a spiritual level. And there is some truth in that. The Law of Seven Octaves, we do know that there's something to the idea that there are 7 different levels of consciousness. And that is what is most interesting to me, that I ponder on, that allows me in my own spiritual growth, that I'm moving towards a greater understanding beyond my own self. That's what I've got out of it that is worth discussing, the rest of it doesn't need to be true. That can aid and help you. So
absolutely. And I get
we certainly
I get pissed. I get pissed when people make fun of people that are considered like new age or woo woo, because there's some charlatans out there. There's some people that want to do readings that have it's just all a scam or whatever the case may be. But then there are genuine people that are like on the path of enlightenment, on the path of truth, that are learning at even later in their lives and stuff like that, that are good people, that usually they are better people than most people in terms of they have introspection, they meditate, they're more centered and balanced. So I have a real problem when people make fun of it, because it's like, you're going to make fun of this person, but you're an asshole that's, working your ass off just to get material things, when at the end of the day you can't take any of that with you, even if there is an afterlife. So
a lot of times when I hear people criticizing, it's their own ego that's afraid of this information, because some of this information on a spiritual level changes everything that you believe. And so there's a part of you that does not want to believe in that. There's a part of your ego that's not connected to your spiritual self that will avoid that. And that's one defense mechanism, is to make fun of it and to ridicule it, because it makes you feel better. Because if it was true, then everything changes, and that's pretty deep stuff. And I don't want to deal with that deep stuff. I just want to go get my new Ferrari, So there's a part of us. Sometimes you have to question yourself when you hear information and you purposely push it away, and then you come back to it later on and you say, why did I push it away before? And there is a subconscious part of ourselves sometimes in our spiritual journey that says, maybe not now, or that's too much. So I've found in my own, when I say, hey, this is woo, this is crazy, and I've come back to it, and there's some real truth in what I'm hearing, is that my own ego didn't want access to that information, that was afraid of it, almost. I think that's sometimes what's going on. We're not hearing an actual legitimate criticism of this material. We're hearing fears of the truth of this material by people when they're exerting that criticism. That's what I see sometimes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. Like I said, I think that's why I like your channel, because yes, you do tap into some of the woo-woo stuff, but you have a level head about it, but you also are positive about it. So that's why I'm saying it's like, I think positivity and introspection are probably the two most important things or qualities to have, especially in the world today, based on everything that's going on and the craziness out there. But at the same time, like I said, you have to question these things. You have to cross-reference them. You have to be somewhat skeptical. There are people that are, in the clouds about some of the stuff, and that's fine too.
Right.
But those people, I feel like if you're going to debate about something or have an intellectual conversation or even an argument at some point, you have to do your homework, and that means not looking at one side of things. It means looking at all sides of things, and looking at it from, new eyes, if you will, and what's what. That being said, let's transition now to talk about the Urantia Papers, which if we're talking about channeled works, this is something that I've actually read more than a few times, and whether it's real or not, I've taken some amazing truth from it in terms of
there's some science in it that's legit.
Well, there's a lot of here's the thing about the Urantia Papers that we're going to talk about. There's a lot of science in there that was from like the early 1900s that wasn't even discovered to be true till later. Multiverses, that kind of stuff. It goes through the evolution of the planet and that kind of stuff. So what's your take on the Urantia Papers? Because as far as channeled works go, I think that's probably...
it sounds like a lot of it shares similar properties to the other stuff we were talking about earlier.
So a couple
things.
It doesn't.
I
was first exposed to Urantia and was blown away by its sheer audacity, the hugeness of it. And it's so fascinating and interesting. It covers information that we want to know. For instance, what happened to Jesus? Why is it when we read the Bible that we have all this period of time where we don't know what happened to Jesus during that time?
Yeah, from 3 till 33, it's all a big mystery.
Right. I mean, why? If he's the Messiah, then we should know everything, right? So now, interestingly, and I'll pull it up here. They ask Ra about the Urantia paper. So we can go on. Let's just read what Ra says about it first.
Okay.
There's also another writer that I recommend that you read, Martin Gardner, who discusses. What was your impression? He's kind of he's criticizing the way the material came about. And so.
I don't know for sure, but I think Magical Egypt had a symposium last year where they had a bunch of different speakers. I think he may have been, maybe not. Maybe I'm thinking of somebody else, but
right.
So you're saying that he was critical. He's like a historian or something, or what's his background?
He's critical of it. He goes through a historical background of where it came about and where the information was coming from, and tries to. He does a pretty good job in his book of questioning some of the validity of the channeling. We don't know who the channel. We don't have a way of confirming where the channel and how it came about and how they typed it. He gives his history of what he knew about it. So when they ask Ra, the Urantia book, which I haven't read, who gave that? And then Ra always answers, I am Ra. This was given by a series of discarnate entities of your own earth planes, the so-called inner planes. This material is not passed by the council. Ra explains earlier on that there is a council of Saturn that is on the 8th density that rules our solar system, that approves what goes on our planet. So they're saying that it was not approved. He doesn't say it's not true, but Ra is questioning the Urantia material, or that it's material that we were not allowed to receive. I don't know.
Yeah, but don't you think from reading, you said that the Ra was hard to read. I think the Urantia, the syntax in the Urantia is so advanced, and when it
is.
Look, anybody
which
out
lends
there
credibility to it, which is the same credibility I give Ra, is that the material, the way it's written.
But I've never read. The only thing I don't like about Ra is Ra. I am Ra. Ra. I am Ra. I hate that. Like I just couldn't get over that whole.
It's part of the process of.
No, I know. But I'm saying the Urantia paper is written as if you are being spoken to by some divine figure in the terms of the syntax. Like most people that I hear talking about the Urantia papers or the Urantia book, talk about how they couldn't read it or they had a hard time reading it. And it's
difficult
available on
to
YouTube.
read.
You can listen to it too.
Yeah.
So if anybody
I gotta listen to it, but I can't read it.
Maurice's
And even when I've listened to
dyslexic
it,
ass has to listen to that thing.
I've listened to so many books. When I listen to Urantia, I got it on Audible, you know.
Yeah.
I can maybe about an hour, and I'm lost for a chunk of time every time.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. I want to say that I've read it completely, but it's been over a long period of time in different sections, and some are just incredibly boring. Some are interesting.
Right.
Some are beyond me. But there's something to it. The idea. It's
serious
interesting.
effort.
Yeah, but it's universal bureaucracy. Kind of when you read Urantia, that there's this universal bureaucracy that's
it's like Star Wars, right, or something along. It's like this world.
Is there like a planet heaven, right?
Yeah.
So heaven's like a planet, right?
Well, it seems like from reading it that there's different levels. Kind of what there's and this is described in the Bible that there's many mansion worlds of God. So mansion worlds are these kind of, if you want to equate it to what you were talking about, like the dimension levels before, you could say that where there's these 7 levels that you go through these mansion worlds, and at the end of them, you've evolved enough your consciousness or your spirit, whatever you want to call it, that you can then understand or commune with God, meaning that you can't see him or talk with him before that, but once you ascend to this level, then you're able to do it. And there's, everybody's heard of seventh heaven and different things. So there is a lot of things that correlate with that.
The difference with Law of One is they're saying you are God. God purposely separated himself and chose to forget.
That's what the Urantia Papers talk about too. You just don't know it.
You just don't know. Okay.
And let me explain that. Mm-hmm. The Urantia Papers talk about we all have this divine spark or this piece of God, this thing that's within us, this thought adjuster, that actually, I'm sorry, the thought adjusters do, but this thing that it's
bro.
Yeah, well, that's what do you mean? That's part of it, bro.
I know,
but it talks about this divine spark that we all have, and that's also within Gnosticism. So people that.
And it's with reality transurfing and a lot of other concepts. I even talk about it.
In Gnosticism, the main idea is that God was this thing which was forethought, which is this big idea or this I don't even know what you would call it, like a probability or some thought probability or something. And then there's this aspect of God, which was a female aspect, Sophia, which emanated from God. And Sophia, I believe in ancient Greek, means wisdom. That's why the word philosophy means the love of wisdom. But Sophia emanated from God without her male counterpart, which was like Christ or consciousness or whatever. And then that created this not evil, but ignorant God called Yaldabaoth. And Yaldabaoth in Gnosticism is basically the God of the Old Testament, which is, you shall not take another God but me. Yeah, he's a very jealous, angry God.
Angry God.
And then when you start
a
reading...
real turd, if you will.
You start reading the New Testament, and it's a completely different story. It's all about love and Jesus.
Talking about different gods, right?
Right. So when people that are religious talk about the Bible, it's like, do you even know what you're talking about? Because you really have to look at the history, who wrote what, where did a lot of the Jesus stuff came 40 years after his death and from Paul in like 79 AD, which so you have to look at everything objectively, like I was saying before. But the thing that I find interesting about the Urantia Papers, like you said, number one, it talks about Jesus's life. And it also talks about Melchizedek a lot. And Melchizedek is an interesting character to me. He's one of these mystical characters from the Bible that's only mentioned a couple times. I think once in Genesis is referred to as a
Melchizedek. He's like the spiritual order in the Bible, right? Jesus was a member of the Melchizedek order.
Right. So but he's also a person, apparently too, according to the Urantia Papers.
So have you heard of Paul Selig?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. I was actually listening to an episode of Duncan Trussell Family Hour. And there was an episode where that dude was on there, and he was channeling Melchizedek.
Melchizedek.
And people
he has a very unusual way of channeling that.
People that are interested in this, and it's kind of crazy. This guy's going to creep you out when he talks.
His books are awesome. When
but
you read
his
the
name's
books, you
Paul
don't have that.
Selig, Selig. Yeah, and he he channels this entity called Melchizedek. And like I said, Melchizedek is a high order priest from the Bible, but he's also referenced as a person sometimes too. So maybe there's maybe it's an archetype, kind of like Christ consciousness kind of a thing. It could be something like that. I think in the Urantia Papers, there's different Melchizedeks, but the one that had to do with us was somebody called like Macaventa Melchizedek or something along those lines. I forget. I'd have to go back and look, but but yeah, it's this weird thing. And that guy that you were talking about, that Paul Selig guy,
he's like this. So then they walked along the river. The river. He's kind of, when you listen to him live, it's disconcerting. When you listen to one of the books where it's not the duplicity, the message is pretty. It's nothing woo. It's nothing crazy. It's very spiritual and something that you and I could listen to. But yeah, there's something to it. It's interesting. The Melchizedek thing. Yeah. So Ra is saying the difference with Urantia and Ra is their explanation of Jesus. That's the interesting thing. So Ra is saying his real name was Yeshua, and Yeshua had been a previous incarnation in fifth density and came back on purpose to be a martyr, to introduce his teachings and concept of love. A lot of what we understand about Yeshua was misunderstood later on. That's Ra. So there is this little bit of a contradiction between those two that's worth talking about. But yeah.
When you say Yeshua too, he's referring to Jesus, which back then they didn't have J, wasn't really part of their vocabulary, so that was the ancient translation to what his name would have been. And I'm just trying. So the Urantia Papers. So again, this is a very woo thing. There's no way to verify it, but I think the interesting thing about the Urantia Papers is the origin of it. Meaning, so when we were talking about the Law of One, it was this group of people that were almost intentionally trying to channel something. With the Urantia Papers, it happened.
It was out of the blue.
It happened in Chicago in the early 1900s, I think the 1920s. There was this guy, Dr. William Sadler, who was a debunker by nature. He actually would go around debunking other channelers, mystics, fortune tellers, that kind of stuff. So him and his wife would go around doing that. And then one night, one of their neighbors came to him and said, you got to come. My husband's talking in his sleep. It's really weird. Come check this out. So they go to this guy's place, and there's some debate on who the guy is. Some think he was somehow related to Dr. Sadler. Other people think that it was just some random banker from the area. So he goes over there, and this guy is saying all this crazy stuff in his sleep. So he's basically like sleep channeling. Some people refer, or equate it to the sleeping prophet, which would have been Edgar Casey, which Edgar Casey would fall asleep and then, basically come out with all this information. They said he could like lay his head on a book, fall asleep, wake up, and know what was inside the book, which is crazy. But so then Dr. Sadler put this little group together where they were going to transcribe everything this guy was saying and start writing it down, which became the Urantia Papers. And then eventually they started Urantia Foundation and created the Urantia book. Now, the interesting thing about this is that they're not really advertising it. It's not something that's really out there. It's not something that you would be easily able to find. You know what I'm saying?
No.
No,
it's not. I found it at Barnes & Noble because it was this gigantic book. What the heck is this?
Right.
I didn't even know they sold the full book because I just know they're papers, and I guess the collection would be gigantic.
So the other one that's similar is a waspe. Have you seen this one, a waspe?
No, what's that?
Which is similar to it's longer than a Urantia, but yeah, when they have
can't be longer than Urantia, bro.
It's longer than Urantia. It's the longest channeled work.
That's impossible.
It's very biblical and way more boring than Urantia. It's straight the boring part of the Bible, pretty much, branched out over 1,495 pages. So,
well, to get settled in, folks.
Right?
Get some cookies and milk and kick your legs up.
There's a part of me that believes everything could be real. Everything that we're talking about could be real.
Right.
on some level. There and what if? It's fun to ask that question. What if Urantia and Ra and Owaspe and all of it? How are we going to get this information? We're not going to get it through archaeology. We're not going to get it through science. If you wanted to get us this information, how would you do it? If you wanted to get us the Urantia information, this probably the best way to do it is to channel it and then let people decide for themselves, not force it down their throats, but make it available, make the information available. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's all these things are great points. It's really hard, like I said, to not look at the channeling thing with a skeptical eye. And when I mean that, I do mean it from coming from a place with an open mind, but I think there is this thing which is true open mind skepticism, in which, there are weird anomalous things, but you do have to look at, the bigger picture and where it could fit in and that kind of stuff. And I just think
so. Let me ask you, when you think about Urantia, what was the spiritual teaching that you got out of it that has helped you spiritually?
So, for me, when I first read it, well, first of all, the reason why we got into it was I was just looking up something about Jerry Garcia and the guitarist from the Grateful Dead. And in what I was reading, it said Jerry Garcia, Jimi Hendrix, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Steve Vai, and some famous composer, all these famous musicians were avid readers of it. So, you have one of my guitar heroes, Jerry Garcia, reading this thing. I want to know because he had some crazy, imagination when you look at the songs and the, and even Steve Vai went as far as to make almost an entire album dedicated to it, where there's certain songs that are called things from the Urantia Papers. So what was this thing, so
he's not hiding that one.
So that intrigued me for sure. Who are all these crazy artists that are some of the best of our time, and what was this thing that they were reading? So at the time I was still playing in bands and playing music and stuff. So started reading it, and it just seemed like there was the fact that it was fusing science with religion, or not even religion, but science, spirituality, and philosophy. It's kind of what's, because there's not that doesn't really exist many other there's not many other works that you can read that have those things. Usually they're separate. There will be, you can read science all day long, or you can read spirituality all day long, or you can read philosophy all day long, but they usually don't overlap. Maybe sometimes philosophy and spirituality, but not all three of those things together. So even though when I was listening to it and reading it and trying to gather as much information as I could, it wasn't that I was believing that this thing was real wholeheartedly, but just that some of the topics and some of the, like we said before, you can take bits of truth, and things that have to do with personal introspection and insight and, love and, consciousness-based things, that kind of rang true with me, and I hadn't read that in anything that was like that before. So I guess that was pretty much it. I know Maurice got into it for a little bit too, so he might have a different take on it.
No, it's kind of what Brian was saying, I try to listen to it at work, but if I was doing anything where my brain needed to be there, I'd lose my place in it every time. You got to be paying. You can't do anything. You got to sit there and really think about what's going on with that bad boy. But it's cool.
Well, one thing we all have in common, the three of us, is that we know there's more to the universe, and we deeply want to know. There's just this yearning.
I just say if there isn't, that's a big waste.
What a waste, right? There's a feeling that we can have access to some higher level of information. Deep down, we know that it's there, that we're blind and ignorant to what's really going on when we look up at the skies and look up at the universe. And I want to know. And if I have to read some false information in the process, oh, so be it. That's going to be part of the process. But I want to know. There's something more to this, and I want to know.
So finally, I want to touch on something. So when we had Soraya from Where Did the Road Go podcast on our podcast, we were talking a little bit about channeling stuff, and he had mentioned this thing that I'd never heard of, which is called the Seth Material. The Seth Material is another channeled piece. It was channeled by a woman in the 60s, I believe. And her husband was like a painter or something. So I guess she would channel this guy Seth from history. I don't even think he was anything particularly,
No.
he wasn't like divine or anything like that. It was just
Sounds like evil almost.
He's a multidimensional being, basically, just kind of an explorer. He didn't explain himself as being human. He had been incarnated in different things, but
what he explained is that consciousness, like what we're saying, is all there is, and consciousness survives death, and it's basically about how when we die, the Seth person is explaining that we just become this disembodied spirit or consciousness or whatever, and that we transcend, and that it's correlated with reincarnation, so we just keep living different lives over and over, but with the same consciousness or personality, I think is what they describe it as. So I haven't gone too deep into it, but that's just kind of what I've taken from it.
I'm a huge fan. The Seth Material is amazing, and I recommend it for anybody that is on a spiritual path. It truly. Jane Roberts was the person that channeled it, and if you want to know more of her background, she wrote a book on the process she went through on how to channel. And you can see when she was channeling, she was out of it, which is one of the reasons I find legitimacy in some of these. She wasn't awake and talking. She would not remember, like her husband would. Sometimes she would remember, but the person that would record everything would tell her about it. So she was leaving and he would come in. And so there's some legitimacy with this channel. And it wasn't anything crazy. I mean, he was talking about how our thoughts create reality. And he does explore a little bit how there are parallel universes, but primarily the most fundamental teaching is that we create our reality, and he gives examples and teachings on it, and it's powerful stuff. It's the beginning. If you go back and look at Esther Hicks and Abraham, who's incredibly popular, you know about Esther Hicks?
I've seen you mention it. I know you post stuff, like you've done episodes about it.
Esther Hicks is amazing. And the thing about Esther Hicks, she's claiming to channel Abraham, which is source as an entity. But when you go and visit, go watch Abraham, if it's her that's doing it, it doesn't matter. The bottom line with Abraham's information is you will get something out of it, even if it's completely BS and she's not channeling anything. I think there's different levels of channeling, like a wider band and a more singular band, like with Ra and Urantia and Seth. It's like a single band that's coming in, and then you might be with like Abraham. But she learned everything and started her path towards channeling from Jane Roberts. So there's different kinds, but it's the same message. It's just letting us know we create our own reality, which is a fundamental teaching that a lot of us don't get or understand, or in many ways is used against us. Our ability to create reality is used against us. And so a lot of maybe this entity like Seth just wants us to become aware of our power through the law of attraction to create reality. And the teachings, they're not complicated. I recommend any of the books. There's a bunch of them that you can get on Audible, and fantastic stuff, really interesting. Another reason why channeling works interests me. One of the things about it channeling that, for instance, with Esther Hicks, I've gone and seen Esther Hicks, and there's something going on. I could see an energy, and maybe that was just me wishful thinking, but when she's speaking, I could see an energy. The crowd's involved. There's something going on there. But when she is channeling, she doesn't have to give evidence. She doesn't have to say, well, based on studies, you should do this or that. She can say, you should do this or that. So it's sometimes maybe if somebody is saying they're channeling, it's easier for them to give information because they don't have to go back and cite research or articles. They can come from a place of authority. So some people that are faking channeling may still have some relevant information because it allows them to say truths. You know, does that make sense? Like she can get up and say and she doesn't have to say, well, the science says this, and this is how I found this. There's that too on channeling, that you can get this information. It's direct, and you don't question it as much. You're not saying, okay, what's the scientific basis behind it? So it's a different way of assimilating this material, if that makes sense.
So absolutely. Yeah. So I'm gonna point this out though, and I don't want to come off as like egotistical or whatever.
No, hey.
Okay. So. But this is what I think is personal truth. You and I are both deeply into meditation. I have kind of like a mixed hybrid of like an ancient form of meditation mixed with a family tradition meditation,
Right.
mixed with my own little things that I do. I know you do meditation pretty avidly, and you even post a lot of guided meditation on your channel. For me,
Absolutely.
if channeling was going to happen, why wouldn't it have happened through me? Meaning that I'm on a path of truth and enlightenment. I know a lot about ancient civilizations, ancient history, the way the mind works, the way consciousness works, the way that what we know about the biology of how we're basically our mind works. During meditation, if channeling was going to happen, now I've seen weird things, I've experienced weird things,
Right.
but no entity has ever come to me and started talking to me or.
So my answer to that is, how do you know? I've had times when I've wanted to, okay, I'm going to try to channel. And I have stuff come to me and I say, okay, I'm going to type this out. And then was that me? I don't know.
Couldn't have been.
I'm
couldn't have
typing
been
it out like I'm channeling an entity.
You have to be open, though, right? You have to be open to the fact that it's your subconscious. You could be talking to your subconscious.
You could be talking to your subconscious. There's always that question for me, why I would never release any channel material. When I've had sat down and wrote and it felt like I was communicating, was that me? And I might have channeled in the past, but I don't have a way of knowing. It's not like this entity might have even given me a name while I was typing it out and explained who they were. But deep down, it felt like me just coming up with this idea. So I'm not gonna. So we may be channeling all the time. We may be channeling when we have information coming to us. We may not understand what's actually happening when there is a channel. We're accessing information all the time. And so the question is, are they going to introduce themselves as an entity, or is it just thoughts? And how do you know the thoughts in your mind are your thoughts?
Exactly.
That's the real question when it comes to channeling. So
I mean, that's speculation
I love that
too,
concept
right?
Too. I'm actually working on a little short movie that's revolving around that concept. Like
exactly.
musicians,
That's a great
when they write
idea.
these songs, a lot of these musicians, they write them very quick.
Channeling,
they're not agonizing
music and
over
channeling is such a perfect example of channeling. You have a song come to you sometimes immediately. It's all there. Where is it coming from? Are you channeling it? Is it a part of some information field? Is it in your brain all the time and it came up? That's the question that I want to know the answer to. And you make good points. I think that's the question I have with channeling. Is it me? Is it a part of my deep subconscious? Why haven't I mean, hey, I have access. Wouldn't the entity want to talk to me? I have my podcast. Hey, I'm perfect. Come on, channel with me. I don't know. You know what I mean?
And
that's
I'm not even
debating
that the people that are channeling these things, so that lady that channeled the Law of One, I'm not even debating that she was in a meditative state and they asked questions. My thought is she could have had she could have read Zachariah Sitchin or what's his face, Chariot of the Gods, Eric Von Donigan. She could have read one of those, and had that in her subconscious, so that when she's channeling, those are the preconceived notions that are coming out based on that.
The legitimate argument against the Law of One is that they were working on channeling as far back as 1972 for 9 years. She had 9 years to work up all these ideas so that by the time she's channeling, this is stuff that she's been talking about with all these people. And it may seem like it's out of the blue, but it had been a natural fruition of stuff she had already been researching. And there's no way for us to truly know. And so when you get this information, you have to judge for yourself. Everybody does. And you're right. That's my first thought when I'm reading this. Even though this sounds so advanced, maybe she was pretty damn smart in the first place to create this kind of a channel.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
That's why
you just never really know. That's the thing. But it's definitely intriguing.
If out of all the three, I think that me personally, that the Urantia Papers are the weirdest one in the sense of how it was conceived.
The weirdest.
Not to mention it happened so long ago, before technology. We really have no way of confirming or, could have just been, mythologized in a certain way or put out a certain way. The other one would be the Seth Material, because from what I've read, it seems like it's kind of genuine. And actually, the ideas in the Seth Material are just like Vedic or Buddhist type of ideas. They're not really that crazy, they're not really crazy, things that haven't been proposed before. So there's that. I think the Law of One is the least is the least credible out of the three. If I don't think any of them are really that credible. I'm just going to say that again. And it's nothing personal. Right. I'm not trying to disparage. If you believe it, amazing. Like I said, I think you can take amazing things from them, and belief is maybe part of that. So if you believe it and it makes you a better person, more the power to you. You know, same thing with the Bible or whatever you want to say. Even part of the Bible's pretty much channeled, you know. So
I mean, but C channel works all the time.
Right. So my argument isn't for that. It's just that if we're going down this road, you have to also entertain this idea of the subconscious, which has been brought up recently with all the psychedelic talk, whether it be DMT, you know, in ayahuasca ceremonies, or let's say heavy doses of psilocybin, or you know, whatever the psychedelic is. There's certain states that you can achieve where you're talking to other beings or you're in commune with other beings. Now, are those other beings, are they in your subconscious? Are they things that you're drawing from your senses? Like you mentioned earlier, you know, you guys were just talking about music, about taking in frequencies and, you know, being on a certain level or whatever. The way our brain works and the way I understand is like perception is all just, we're vibrating at a certain frequency. And this is not woo-woo. This is science, is that molecules vibrate at a certain frequency. Okay. So let's say music's playing. Let's say it's 432 hertz. It's A, you know, that's going to come across the same way because we have some sort of filter within us, call it our mind or our consciousness or whatever. We're taking in that information and we're processing it through our brains, and that's what it is. The true could be said for everything. Everything we see, everything we touch, everything we feel is all just frequencies that we're like a big satellite dish that's filtering some things out. And that being, you know, I didn't mention this earlier, but we know that we only can perceive like 3 to 5% of the universe and like spectrum of things anyways. So there could be this whole world of things going on that we just have no idea of. Now, that being said, most physicists, quantum physicists, will say, oh, but we have a good idea, so we can rule out this, that, or the other. But they haven't been able to prove it, because if they were able to prove it, then there wouldn't even be need to have any talk of any sort of mystical or woo stuff, because we would have the answers, which is not the case. Right. So that's just my little rant on that.
Another one that's interesting, I wanted to get your opinion on, is the Course in Miracles. That was originally, the interesting story behind that was when the government was researching LSD, the program that they had where they were experimenting with LSD, the same doctor was involved in the Course in Miracles. So there may be some link. If you look it up, there may be some link between the Course in Miracles. She went into a deep trance, just like Ra, and she started channeling. She doesn't say it in the book, but channeling what was supposedly Jesus. Jesus is giving a spiritual teaching through this. A lot of it is biblical and it's talking about love and forgiveness. There's no aliens are discussed. There's nothing crazy. But that's also a link between psychedelics. It's interesting that what was the government program back in the 60s where they were experimenting?
MK Ultra.
Ultra.
I think it even goes back further than that. But yeah,
I think the dude that she was like, the MK Ultra is linked to the Course in Miracles, and so that tells me, even if you don't believe in the Course in Miracles, that there is a psychedelic link to this channeling, and it's why you should be talking about it, because your channel's dedicated to that. So there is some kind of, we need to explore, there is a link to it, you know. So I think you're right.
And here's another point I do want to make, because we keep talking about aliens, if it's even more woo-woo than channeling, and I want to point out that I don't think it is, because we now have physical evidence of UFOs.
Right.
Meaning we have the Go Fast video, we have the Tic Tac video, we have the gimbal video. We have a lot of momentum going on, whether it be to the stars and other.
What are they doing?
Who knows? Right? Well, that's the big argument. Is some people say To the Stars is just a money grab scheme. Some people say that no, they're legit and they're just interested in the subject. I mean, they've got Hal Puthoff, who was part of the SRI program on their team, you know, who I think is one of the biggest investigators of consciousness there ever has been. So, in terms of that, like what you're saying, correlating to like what, you know, governments are looking into this stuff. This is not something that weird, you know, like when we're talking about this, the UFO thing though, we have UFOs on video that are anomalous vehicles that we can't explain, that our Navy has acknowledged, that other branches of the government have acknowledged. So in that regard, I will point out that if you had to tell me to pick between channeling, and maybe they're related somehow that we just don't know, but if you had to tell me pick between UFOs or channeling, I would pick UFOs because there's some physical evidence of it. And I'm not saying don't have faith or don't believe in things that we maybe can't see, only that I go based on proof and what we can draw from in terms of evidence, and that's physical evidence.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I get it. But even if channeling is the subconscious and we're getting this information, what an amazing thing our subconscious can do. If some dude's subconscious came up with Urantia, that's pretty amazing. Crazy. I mean, even if it's not true,
right.
And the sheer complexity of it. So channeling is interesting to me as somebody that studies consciousness and the brain. It may not be true. It's certainly, I'm not advocating that everybody needs to go. Another interesting, I've interviewed people that channeled during the interview. I don't know what to make of it, but it's something that is interesting. I think that there is a part of our subconscious, even as a subconscious trick. If I say right now I'm channeling God and I start talking to you as God, the stuff I come up with might be pretty interesting, even if it's my subconscious speaking as. This process of channeling has some kind of mental equivalent that's interesting to study, that may help us to explore the subconscious mind as humans.
Right.
And
I think
whatever aspect of it.
I think the psychedelics are going to be a huge part of exploring the subconscious mind too. I think with all the psychedelic research going on, we're going to have a pretty good idea, number one, about maybe unveiling some other aspects of consciousness that traditional science hasn't yet to point out. The other thing could be that maybe, there's a lot of talk that these DMT entities are part of our subconscious, or maybe epigenetic memories or something along those lines. We would probably get to the bottom of that sooner or later. I'm not even saying we'll get a for sure answer, because obviously that's what science is this constant evolution of ideas and people building off of each other and creating this reality. But I think that we're going to have a pretty good idea sooner than later kind of what's going on. But that doesn't rule out the fact that once we know those things, maybe it opens up other questions, maybe it opens up other windows, maybe it opens up other doors. I don't know. But
one thing that I believe, that I think that more and more science is proving, is that consciousness is non-local. So a lot of the stuff that we're experiencing on psychedelic, the consciousness is not existing inside of our brain. When we have imagination or stories and things, there may be we have access to some kind of larger mind, a field of information that we are getting our information from. We've injured parts of the brain and still been able to remember things. When we've gone and looked at it, would be impossible. Our memory is not located in a certain part of our brain. So they're starting to think, well, our consciousness may not be local. And if that's the case, then everything we're discussing becomes even more important, because there's aspects of our consciousness outside of our mind, which we may unveil when we take psychedelics, or access when we channel.
Right.
That might be part of what's going on. So...
No, it's an interesting conversation for sure. Like I said, we could talk about this stuff, all day, but at the end,
because we'll never figure it out.
Yeah, we are never
around,
But if I'm just sitting by myself talking about it, it's not as cool as to talk about some other people that have, that's all.
Yeah.
And so people listening to this,
about it, you're
I'd
crazy.
love to read
you
the
got
comments.
A couple people.
Put comments on this video. I want to hear your comments. I'm not standing here as an advocate that says this is the truth. I'm saying this stuff's interesting. I want to know what you think. That's what that's my
that's
crazy.
That's what we do for sure.
That's pretty much what we do in most of our episodes. I mean, I have my own beliefs on things and my own theories and takes on different subjects and mysteries and certain things. But like I said, since we've done this podcast, that window or gap has closed to a point now where I have a general idea of mysteries that I think are legit, and then everything else that is probably not legit. But that is only based on physical evidence and research and studies and different things. So faith, when you start talking about faith and belief, and those bring a whole different set of problems to the equation, because you know, it's smart. If somebody came up with a religion and said you just have to have faith, it's a smart way to keep those people within the religion,
Right.
because there's nothing really physical for them to hold on to, and they literally, as long as they're believing it and not actually, experiencing something, it's easy to keep thinking, oh, well, this is real, or something along those lines. But
Just gotta listen to George Michael, baby.
Careless whisper.
At the end of the day, though, what do you think? What do you think is the biggest, conclusion that you've come up with from reading these channeled works and talking with other people? Do you think it is, like I said, the self-embetterment aspect of it, where even if it's real or not, that you do, there is introspection and those kinds of things? Or do you think it has to do with, I think belief or hope is a powerful thing. And I always hold out hope that there is a metaphysical. That's something that I will always hold out hope for.
Right.
But do you think that, and it's been fundamental, I think, to our evolution as people as well. Do you think, what do you take? Is it something along those lines? Is it something different? What's your final takeaway from all this stuff?
It's a really weird question for me, because I've experienced the metaphysical in my life.
Right.
And I have absolute 100% for sure, no doubt about it. There's no faith with me. And so this information, a lot of it resonates on a deeper subconscious level, that I'm a part of something bigger. There's something bigger going on all around us. That's the biggest thing, that why I'm attracted to this information, because I do believe that I'm a part of something bigger that's going on this planet, and this information will help me in my spiritual process. That's the best way, if I was to put it in a smaller level. But it's, I don't want to make any claims or anything like that. Everybody should read and access this information on your own. And if you have friends like us, we can talk about it. I don't want to make any claims that tell you that this is how it is or anything, but on a personal level, it's made me feel as if there's something much greater going on. And it's helped me to identify things in myself that have sped up my spiritual process and spiritual growth on a daily basis, and allowed me to help others on a larger scale, just understanding my own polarities, the way I think, the process of how I create my own reality, all of these things, especially with Seth. When you get an understanding and read Seth, you understand, you almost have a responsibility in the ways that you think, because you're creating the world around you. And so it's opened up something inside of me that's still ongoing in learning about myself. That's why it's been powerful for me. And all of it has. Urantia, all of it. Urantia, Ra, Seth, Abraham, Course in Miracles. It has given me information that has expanded my understanding of how I deal with the world and understand the world and help other people. If that's the best way I can explain it.
Well, that's a great explanation.
Beautiful.
And I think that's why most people believe in religion as well. It's this,
Right.
this groundwork.
Gives you a reason to live.
Yeah,
man,
it's
gives
this
you a
like
purpose.
skeleton of which you can build off of, like you said, and understand life and what it really is. I think, me personally, the people that have no hope, or the people that are, don't believe in anything or whatever, that's kind of a mundane way of living. And I have nothing against those people, but generally when I come across people like that have no personal spirituality, I'm not even talking about believing in a religion, but just some personal spirituality or belief in some sort of, higher calling, if you will. Those people are very pessimistic, very negative. They're generally people that will argue with you about stupid, mundane things. And the way they carry themselves is just a very, I don't even know how to explain it, just very downer like. You don't want to be, you want to be around somebody that has good energy. Yeah, you don't want to be around somebody that's very negative and very, pessimistic. It's just, you can feel it. You can feel it when you talk to them. So
Right.
like I said, I think it's important to have some sort of thing to believe in, whether it's metaphysical.
Well, this material has allowed me to look at people like that. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
It's allowed me to, I see somebody that's like you're explaining, and I see myself in that person.
Yeah.
I see myself in everybody because of this material and how I think of consciousness. So yeah, when somebody's negative and they've given up hope, if you're watching this program right now and you've given up hope, you don't need faith. You can provide proof. If you do certain things, you can see your reality change. Nobody here is promising you things without proof, but you can change your reality just through your consciousness, and hope is one of the aspects that will do it. That's the amazing thing. We don't need to have faith. It's not just on belief. Your consciousness has a direct effect on the reality that you're in right now, and you can change it. And you don't have to believe in this material. Just prove it for yourself. Go and access this material, and you can see that there is a reason to have hope. I know exactly how those people feel because I've been there, and you probably have had times when you've been there too.
Right.
Right?
Well, I think even just meditation has been proven, even scientifically, to, help the brain process things. You're a calmer, nicer person. It has even physical effects too, where people's heart health and brain function and everything is far better when they meditate. So the things that we've talked about are not that crazy in that sense. Now, the question that we propose to it is the meaning of it. What is the meaning of this? So meaning is something that humanity always is projected onto the universe. Right. What does this mean? Why are we here? What are we doing? What is this purpose? So that's something that we project. I question that every day. Is that something that we have created that there is no answer to because it doesn't even exist? Which is kind of a...
What is the meaning for you, Mike? What would you...
I think we're basically some sort of art, and I think we're art. We're living, breathing art, and I think our purpose is to create more. And whether it's whether it's having kids, whether it's being an artist, whether it's being, if you believe that we are all one, some Buddhist or Hindu idea, or we're all there, some non-duality type of thing. We all are God or a piece of God, or we all are part of one consciousness, or whatever the case may be. If you believe that, then you have to believe that whatever that thing is would want to live itself out in as many different forms and in as many different ways as possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You would want as much variety. If one thing split into a million different things, that thing would want those things to all live different experiences. So for me, I've always thought about it from the aspect of being, a musician and artist myself, that that's the purpose, is to create. So that's what I take away.
That's beautiful. What about you, Maurice?
Good
what
answer.
Do you think?
I mean, I agree. I just think the same thing, and I try and just create stuff. So I'm constantly making videos or whatever, and I don't know. If it's not the case, then it's all about finding a way to waste your time, if you will, in something that you enjoy.
I think that you really pulled something out of me when you said that it's about creating. I do. I think that that's part of the meaning. I do think that sometimes it feels like the universe is a question, like a holographic question that God asked. With this great power I have to be God, should I focus on myself or others? Kind of. Everybody's going through some level of understanding, focus on themselves or service to themselves or service to others. But I do agree that we are pieces of art, and that if you truly conceive of infinity, that it would get pretty boring after a while. And you'd want to forget, and you'd want to have multiple experiences and integrate that. And you'd create a system where you could continue to expand and have more and more experiences, and it would make you even greater and better. So I think what you're saying, everything, there's something going on, and we're a part of it, and it's fun. I'm grateful to be breathing right now, thinking about it and talking about it. It's totally fascinating. Yeah.
Well, let's wrap it up there. So check out Brian's channel. It's Reality Revolution. It's under your name though, Brian Scott.
Brian Scott, right?
And you can also, the links below, you can check out his website as well. You're on all podcast platforms as well?
I'm all podcast platforms.
Okay.
Got a book coming out in February, The Reality Revolution. So excited about that. So
yeah, if you're
Sweet.
like I said, he's got a great page. If you're laying in bed at night and want to, like, you know, throw on some guided meditation or something, he's got some great stuff on there. He's also got a lot of interviews with a lot of the subjects we were just talking about, people that are familiar with these subjects and stuff. And is there anything else you got?
oh man, thanks for having me on. It was fun. It was fun. So,
Yeah, no, I we'll get
Yeah,
you on
for sure.
again. We, I know
Anytime.
you're you've got a bunch of different topics you can talk about, so we can get you on in the
Sure.
future, talk about some other stuff. But this was fun, and I think it's enlightening in terms of being able to look at things with a skeptical eye, but also look at the possibilities. I think that's important.
Yeah.
And check us out at patreon.com/Mike and Maurice for $2 a month. You'll get some exclusive content. You can also go to our website, mikeandmauricemindescape.com. And as you can see throughout the whole episode below, we've had all of our social media links. All right, Brian, thanks.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, my man.
Have a good one. It's good to see you guys.
Peace.
Cheers.
Peace.